Welcome back to another BRAP. It is April the 17th, 2024. I got to say, it feels like I haven't done a BRAP show in like 2 weeks. It just feels like it's been forever. Probably because I was doing like a Friday night BRAP rant and didn't do one last week. So, but it's great to be back. I have a lot to talk about. A lot of gaming related news. We're going to discuss some industry related things coming out of GDC. Actually, there's a great article by GameIndustry.biz. It talks about interviews and talks about one of the speakers at GDC about the difficulties, the challenges of funding for video games. And we always hear that the solution to AAA games, the solution to $70 games and sustainability and things like that, with AAA game development. There's a reason why companies spend the amount of money they do for AAA games. That's because there's just a demand for it in the marketplace. People keep skating past that obvious data point that, look, if you look at the Circana NPD charts, you'll see that AAA games are typically the games that are charting, typically are the games that are some of the best sold games of the year. And there's some challenges with getting money if you're a new studio, if you're trying to create a game, because the venture capitalists, the private equity firms, they're looking at you as a potential risk if you don't fit a certain mold or certain idea that they have. So we're going to talk about this very interesting conversation coming out of GDC, one that wasn't covered by certain influencers, content creators who said, "Oh, I was at GDC and this is what I'm hearing." Well, you didn't hear the whole thing, because this is the conversation you should have been having, which we'll talk about here later. We're also going to discuss Final Fantasy VII, some of the sales numbers around that. And again, I'll go back to content creators who were saying, we should have been on Xbox. But should have the game, should have I can't even talk today. Should Final Fantasy VII should it be on Xbox? And had it been, would it mattered? We'll talk about that. There's some missing nuance and context in that conversation. Surprise, surprise. So we're going to dig into that a little bit as well. And we're also going to discuss this Nintendo Direct that was today. I didn't get a chance to watch it live. Unfortunately, I was working, so I didn't get a chance to watch it. But we'll talk about that as well, and some other gaming related news. But I do want to give a big shout out to everyone in the live chat. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening. As always, I appreciate the support. We've been seeing a lot of growth lately with viewership, with new subscribers. So I just want to say again, thank you so much for supporting the channel. It means a lot. This is a labor of love. We talk about video games here because we love video games. I think there need to be more podcasts, more content creators that truly love video games, that are students of the industry. Because I feel like if you really love video games, you're a student of the industry of video games. And I don't get the sense that that's necessarily the case many of the times. I think that often it is more, the priority is more of how can I monetize and make money. So anyhow. All right, so do me a quick favor, everyone. Smash that like button if you haven't done so already. I'm going to drop a link here in the live chat, or I already did. Please retweet the link or share it on your favorite social media platform. Let everyone know that we're live. And I'm sorry, give me a second here. Crota Rig says, BRAP, I'm not sure how much it was sold on Xbox, but they should get Final Fantasy VII on PC sooner than later, and then port them up to the Switch too. So Yeah, I mean, obviously there's going to be a Final Fantasy VII port to PC, so we'll see. I gotta say, Dorian Gray, you're an odd character. I'll just leave it at that. All right, let me get to some gaming news here. The crew will be joining us here shortly. And, all right, give me just a second here. There was one news item that I wanted to pull up. And I'm also distracted by AEW right now because Dynamite's playing in the background here. So I'm a huge wrestling fan, by the way. All right. So Ghost of Tsushima is releasing on PC. Next month, the game's coming out May the 16th. And we have some news that the PC version of Ghost of Tsushima will have trophy support. This is a first for PlayStation PC titles. Actually, I love the idea of having trophies on the PC ports of PlayStation first-party games. Now, I struggle with replaying Sony first-party games, except for probably The Last of Us. I'll play that on PC. I say struggle playing I don't mean struggle in playing Sony first-party games. What I mean is struggle playing them or having the motivation, I should say, to play them again on PC. So that's kind of a thing. I know Slow-Mo does it. I just don't know if I'm going to pick up Ghost of Tsushima. I might do it. I will be able to run the game at high settings. They did. Sucker Punch did release the performance specs for Ghost of Tsushima on PC. I have a 3070 GPU. I'll be able to play that game at 1440p, 60 FPS. So I may pick it up. We'll see. We'll see. Look, I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth right now. I need to complete that game first before I move on to any other games. And I'm also next week Stellar Blade releases, so it just depends. There's we say this on the show a lot. There's just a lot of video games that are coming out, and just a lot of video games. There's a lot of video games right now, a lot to play. Just don't have as much time as I would like to dedicate to playing video games. But yeah, so this Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut coming out May 16th on PC. A new PlayStation PC overlay will also debut with the release of the Director's Cut. And this is per Video Game Chronicles. And this is actually from Nixus Software's Julian Hubergretz. I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly. It says, Ghost of Tsushima's Director's Cut is the first PlayStation title on PC that uses new PlayStation overlay, which includes your friends list, trophy settings, and your profile. So this is kind of what we've talked about Sony probably doing at some point. Now, this has also sparked the conversation of will Sony go day and date with their first party? Now that you're getting trophy systems, now that you have an overlay. I actually thought this was long overdue by PlayStation. I thought this is something they should have had when they started bringing their games to PC. So Capono 5150 says, I just love how Sony's getting serious about PC as well. Sony's slowly working in that launcher. And that's a thing. Like, we talk about day and date. We talked about the potential cannibalization of day and date to the PlayStation 5 or the console ecosystem. Maybe it makes sense for them to go day and date if there's a launcher and they can get 100% of that revenue. I mean, that would probably make more sense. But we'll see. We'll see. Obviously they're dedicating some more resources to PC. They're bringing some of these new feature sets, like the PlayStation overlay, to PC games. and it's just I think it's a great addition. It's a great thing that they're adding now. Michael says people said they were going day and date really soon when Horizon Zero Dawn came out, and it's been 4 years and still hasn't happened yet. Well, yeah, people have been saying that for quite some time. So this feature, the overlay, is available on Windows PC. Will be accessible from the in-game menu or keyboard players by pressing Shift F1 shortcut on your keyboard. And when you do that, actually, the VGC article, and I'll drop a link to the article here in the live chat. If you go to the link, you'll see the overlay here that pops up. So, article goes on to state, while playing the game, you can earn PlayStation trophies, just like on PlayStation consoles. Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut on PC shares the same trophy set as the game on PlayStation 5 consoles. In addition, the PS4 version also has full support for achievements on Steam and the Epic's Game Store. So not only are you getting the trophies, but the PlayStation trophies, you're also getting the achievements on Steam and the Epic Game Store. Nexus goes on to say, to make use of features like trophies, friends lists, and crossplay, you can sign in with your existing account for PlayStation Network or create a new account. Yeah, that's a nice way for Sony to increase MAU. The use of PlayStation overlay is optional for both the single-player experience and Legends mode. So it's an option. You don't have to use it. And then this is something that was rumored last year. And that rumor was per the reporting by, and I don't recall this rumor, to be frank. The rumor here was something that was reported with the addition of PlayStation Network, a PSN support to Marvel Spider-Man Remastered on PC. So this is this is kind of interesting because the other Sony games that came to PC, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, Spider-Man Remastered, they can be played without needing to sign up for a PSN account. And that is the opposite with Xbox, where you do have to have an account, which requires an Xbox Live account. And so it's kind of interesting. It's just some games require Xbox Live account for some games on Steam with Xbox. So it's going to be interesting to see how that, the evolution of this. I think Capone was saying, that maybe they're working on a launcher. It's going to see if that ends up happening. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Trying to find the specs here now for let's see here, Ghost of Tsushima specs. I know that came out. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Trying to find the specs here now for let's see here, Ghost of Tsushima. Oh, sorry about that. Got some feedback there. Let's see here, Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima PC specs. Here we go. I should say system requirements. All right, this is per the PlayStation blog. Again, game comes out May 16th. Let's see here. Here we go. Recommended hardware for various presets available in game. All right, so if you are going to play at very low settings, which is 720p, 30 FPS, that will require an Intel Core i3 or 7100 AMD Ryzen 300, or I'm sorry, AMD Ryzen 300, and an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 960 with 4 gigabytes, or an AMD Radeon RX 5500 XT. Also requires 8 gigabytes of memory, 75 gigabytes of hard drive space, and SSD is recommended for this game, and you need to have at least Windows 10, the 64-bit version of Windows 10. So if you're going to play the game at medium settings, that is 1080p at 60 FPS, you need at least an Intel Core i5, an AMD Ryzen 5 3600, an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060, or an AMD Radeon RX 5600 XT, and you'll need 16 gigabytes of memory. Geez, I tell you what, I'm glad I have 32 gigs of memory in my PC. Now, if you want to play at high settings, so high settings is going to be at 1440p at 60 FPS or 4K at 30 FPS. You'll need a Intel iCore i5 at a minimum processor, or an AMD Ryzen 5 5600. You'll also need a NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070, which is the GPU I have, and the CPU I have an Intel. Oh shoot, what do I have? I have an i7 12700K processor CPU. And then I have as I mentioned, the 3070, and I have two M.2 SSDs in my PC as well. So you'll need that configuration to play at 1440 or 60 FPS or 4K at 30. I probably won't play at 4K 30. I'm okay playing 1440 at 60 FPS. That is fine by me. Now, slow-mo will be able to play at very high settings. Because for that, you'll need an minimum Intel Core i5 or AMD Ryzen 5 5600. But for the GPU, you'll need an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4080. You also need an AMD Radeon RX 7900 XT. So those are the recommended PC specs for the different performance modes on Ghost of Tsushima. Now, the director's cut on PC is fully optimized also for ultra-wide monitors. So I believe Gaming Forte should be happy about that, assuming he's going to play the game, because he does have a ultra-wide monitor. And on that note, speaking of ultra-wide monitors and PC gaming, I want to welcome Game Logic. What's going on, Logic?
Not much, BRAP. How you doing?
Doing well. I was just telling the audience here, I kind of feel like it's been forever since I've done a BRAP show for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, and in the chat, if as usual, particularly when I'm on a dynamic mic, let me know if the volume is too low or too high.
You sound excuse me, you sound great on my end. Yeah. So Logic, are you picking up Ghost of Tsushima on PC?
Yeah, of course. Eventually, it may not necessarily be a day one thing for me, but yeah, definitely. I'm a PlayStation on PC collector of sorts.
Ah, okay. Right.
Except that Returnal, I don't do the roguelites. But,
man, Returnal's so good, Logic, so good. I wish there was a way you could just try it once.
I have tried it, BRAP.
Oh, you have tried it.
Okay. That's why I don't. That's why I don't bother. I haven't played Returnal. I have tried roguelites and roguelikes before, though, and I don't do that.
I tell you, man, the combat in that game, the bullet storm, the bullet hell, oof.
But we may talk about a thing that may make me break that golden rule later tonight. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. I will say this. As I was reading the article here by VGC, and they're covering, PlayStation. The PlayStation blog announces too that they're bringing the overlay where you can access your friends list, get trophies. You have to sign into a PlayStation PSN account. What are your thoughts about that? Because as some of the, again, as it's anytime we talk about a PlayStation game going to PC or a successful PlayStation game on PC, the conversation always turns to, oh, well, this means they're going to go day and date. It would just make sense for them to go.
Yeah, it did. It did. Yeah. The news was not even 10 seconds old before I saw people posting that.
Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, let's just pump the brakes. Let's pump the brakes. This doesn't mean day and date, but I think this does make sense for them, considering that this is a way for them to maybe get more monthly active users on the PC side, because now you have to sign in or create a PSN account. With this game, this is the first game that you have to do that. The other games you've had. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't even think we have to extrapolate it that far. Like many publishers and developers have overlays and launchers on PC that don't do day and date. So Rockstar is once again not putting their main title, GTA, on PC day and date, but yet Rockstar has a launcher. And they do that because telemetry is valuable. Customer data is valuable. And getting that data coming directly to you and not siphoning off of an API through Steam is more valuable. And so it's worth it. It also increases the value proposition for consumers, because now you're always within the PlayStation veil, right? When you're on. And so this is the thing that to me is different when, people who like to argue with us about Xbox say, well, if you're on PC and you're playing an Xbox game, then you're an Xbox fan. I was like, well, no, because I don't identify as such with third-party publishers on PC, because no one owns PC as a platform. When I'm playing an Ubisoft game, I don't identify as an Ubisoft person, blah, blah, blah. But when you're playing the all-important MAU game, it does make a difference if you're going through a launcher, because that counts in your numbers, but it also means that telemetry is coming directly to you, and you don't have to get it off of a third party through a data feed.
Yep, exactly. There's value in information and data. So I was just reading down the system requirements for PC. And so I'll be playing this game at 1440p, assuming I get it on PC. I always have this thing where, because I typically play, I always play these games on PlayStation first. And because there's so much to play, it's like, do I want to go back and play it again? And this is this is, again, an open world game. It's going to require some investment of time for me that I just don't know if that I frankly don't have right now. But if I do go back and play it, I'll probably end up playing it at 1440p, 60 FPS. I said earlier, Slow-Mo with his 4080, and I think you have a 4080 as well. Is that correct, Logic?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So you may play this at 4K, 60 FPS.
I don't play at 4K. Everything I play at 1440p.
Okay, so you'll for 1440p, 60 FPS then. Or maybe you'll crank up the FPS a little bit more.
Yeah, it won't be capped, and I'll just play it, however fast the card will drive it.
Yeah, you'll get like 200 frames. It also supports ultra wide monitors as well. So, to your point, I mean, it's to the conversation around them going day and date now has kind of come back, and it's like, okay, guys, like I said, let's just pump the brakes. This doesn't mean day and date. Again, I'm not saying never say never, but I don't see that happening for a variety of different reasons that we've talked about on the show. Yeah,
it could be it, but this isn't the thing. The fact that somebody's doing a launcher is not the slam dunk, right?
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I'm gonna grab the super chat here from JD Gamer, the $5 super chat. Thank you, JD. He says, I'd argue this is how Microsoft wins. People are always concerned with winning, by the way, when it comes to console platform owners. I'd argue this is how Microsoft wins by forcing Sony into an arms race it can't win with IP content platform, such as making the consoles less relevant. Do you want to tackle that before I kind of give my 2 cents on that super chat?
No, that comment wasn't news. That's an opinion from a fan. It's not really what I do.
Okay. All right. An arms race. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, maybe if Microsoft wasn't bringing their games to PlayStation, their first party content. I'm not sure about an arms race in that regard when you're porting your own first party content over to rival platforms. Again, I think there's just a lot of hopes and dreams. JD, this is part of my criticism in the Xbox community. It's always this hyper focus on somehow Microsoft turning the tables on PlayStation, winning whatever war you guys are having in your minds, and not focusing on the fact that, at the end of the day, I mean, Microsoft is in a vastly different position than Sony has, than Sony and Nintendo are in right now.
I mean, if we're buying all the marketing and PR talking points, and we're asserting that whatever the GTL says is correct, then the GTL has said that the game is the platform, and so the foolishness of this constant argument about Microsoft and Sony doesn't really matter and isn't really relevant. What you guys should be arguing about and what you should be salty about is then platform owners are not their own standalone race, and the race is amongst the entirety of the big nine who earn 65 to 68% of the revenue in the gaming industry. And so your competition is Tencent, Apple, Google. So I mean, there's just really no need to talk to us constantly every week about Microsoft versus Sony. If you want to have a conversation about Microsoft versus Tencent, then we can have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, like if the competition isn't PlayStation, as Phil has said, like, but we don't see them as competitors. It's Google,
right. But in order to do that, you guys would have to pay attention to more of the gaming industry in the market than just PlayStation, which seems to be what you guys constantly talk about.
Yeah.
Your guys' major assertion was that one of your guys' major assertions is that AAA games are bad for the industry, exclusives are bad for the industry. We need more AA's and indies. But none of you guys have watched the AAA showcase from April 10th. And I don't think any of you guys watched the Nintendo Indie Direct from today. So I mean, we could just move on. I don't want to spend the entirety of tonight on hypocrisy.
Fair enough, logic. I did not get a great segue, by the way. I did not get a chance to catch the Nintendo Indie World, Nintendo Indie Direct today, and you did. I was fortunately was in a meeting when it happened. But what were some of your takeaways from the Direct, Logic, and were there any games that you were interested in?
Oh yeah, there were a few. I think about 4 to be exact. I'm trying to pull up my my notes. So the ones that so it was kind of a weird indie direct in that, just to me, there were several things that were interesting, and I think what kind of stood out to me is a vast majority of the games, and I think there were 12, 13, 14 games maybe covered in total. That may be short because they did some really quick hits, but there were lots of games that had a really interesting visual style, more so than I think is the norm. It seems like a lot of the times these things are held, there's like 50% that are like below my threshold of interest just based on visual style and visual fidelity. But today, like lots of things stood out. But the 4 that I'm particularly interested in is Yars Rising, which comes out this year. Is a 2D side-scrolling Metroidvania. I kind of think of it as set in a kind of faux dystopian kind of sci-fi future. And when I say that, I mean a little bit more kind of the Fifth Element than like a Blade Runner. That game is by WayForward Technologies, which is responsible for the Shantae series, River City Girls. They actually did Advance Wars 1+2 reboot camp last year. And it is actually based on the Atari OG game that was on the 2600. So the game has several mini games in it, which, based on the ad copy that I read, sounds more to me like puzzles. But some of those puzzles do actually evoke kind of nostalgia from Yar's Revenge. I guess they're kind of top down and follow the visual style of the original. There is an updated version of Yar's Revenge that is in the game's main menu that you'll be able to access, and that game is actually a remake of the original. They say a remake. I read it as a remake, but it says modernized. But I'm like, I don't know how you pull up the 2600 code and get it to run on today's systems if you just modernize it. So I think it's a full-blown remake. WayForward Technologies has been around since 1990. And when it started developing games on the Super NES and Sega Genesis, and today they predominantly do contract work, and their past work includes, they have a huge pedigree, but some of the ones that kind of stuck out to me is they've done a lot of games on Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color. They did a game called WWF Betrayal back in 2001 on the Game Boy Color, X-Men the Official Game in 2006 for the Game Boy Advanced. They've done several Contra games. They did a Blood Rain Betrayal in 2011 on the Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. So they've got a pretty healthy catalog of back work. So really kind of interested to see how that game turns out.
Yeah, there's actually I'm looking at some of the games that were announced today. There's one game that, as a comic book fan, I'm probably interested in. This one is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splinter Fate. Go ahead. So
that's the one when I mentioned, we might get around to talking about a roguelite.
Yeah.
So that is a roguelite. And for people who watched the direct, they made a couple comments, one specifically that stuck out at me that kind of raised my spidey sense, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a roguelite. And then I went and pulled the thread and read some more of the ad copy on it, and it is definitely what it is. That game is one of the ones that, there were a lot of them that were timed console exclusives. And comes out in July of 2024. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like that was an Apple Arcade exclusive for quite a bit. I don't know how long it was for, but according to the article I'm reading, it says that it was a former Apple Arcade exclusive game.
Yeah, it's by Super Evil Megacore Games, which has only done like two. I don't think that game is. I didn't see that listed as part of their back catalog. Their back catalog, I only saw two games that they've done before. They were founded in 2012. Totally remote organization, so they've got employees across like 11 different countries, but they've only done games on iOS, Android, and PC. Both of the games that they've done, Catalyst Black and Vainglory, were both free-to-play multiplayer games.
Okay.
So this game obviously is supposed to include a pretty healthy, robust amount of co-op. So it should be good. I mean, they've clearly got some chops for doing stuff like that in the past.
So Hamp, are you going to dive into this roguelike? I mean, you said you don't like roguelikes, so
I don't. I may bend the rule. Consider this is going to be an indie, and hopefully this is going to come in at it'll come in at $30. There may be a double A premium tax on it for the license. But this is one of those that knowingly I will only get but so far in the game, but I may just go ahead and bite the bullet. I have not. So we've had kind of a renaissance of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games over the last, I guess this generation. So over the last 4 years, you mentioned comic books earlier. I was a huge Teenage Mutant Ninja comics book fan. From the originals done by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. Back where those comics were black and white, and actually read a good healthy amount of Usagi Yojimbo as well. His first appearance in a video game, I think in last year's version or the year before's version, like really kind of caught a lot of people by surprise because they just weren't familiar with the comic book lore. But I haven't played any of those games. I'm just never been a huge TMNT video game fan, but because of that, I may bypass the fact that this is a roguelike and go ahead and buy it anyway.
Look, Logic, if you gave Vanillaware a shot, anything's possible.
That it is.
Yeah. And are you still playing Unicorn Overlord?
Yeah. I'm going back and forth now between that and Granblue Fantasy Relink.
Okay, yeah, another game I got to get back to. I just don't have the time, man, right now. It's funny. I was going to when the panel joined, I was going to ask everyone what they were playing, and I was like, I'm not going to even discuss what I'm playing because the only thing I'm playing right now is Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, which I need to fix, and I have stuff on my backlog right now that I need to get to. Unicorn Overlord is one of those games I'd like to play because I did play 13 Sentinel Aegis, which is another Vanillaware game, very similar to very similar experience to what you're having right now with Unicorn Overlord. I know we talked about some of the innuendos in that game, and as I mentioned to you with 13 Sentinel, you would be in your mech and your character would be naked, and I couldn't understand why, or I don't remember why that was the case, but anyhow,
is your mech piloted by Andrew Tate?
No, it was not. That's too funny. All right, yeah. So that's the one again. I didn't watch the Nintendo Direct, but out of the titles I'm just glancing out, Ninja Turtles would be one I would be interested in. There are some other ones. I'm looking at the screenshots that look kind of interesting. One of them is what is it? L'Oreilly and the Laser Eyes. It's a non-linear puzzle game by Shigeru Wildheart's developer. Sabogo. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was one of the ones that had like there were only 4 that I'm really pretty serious. Will be on my purchase list, but there were like 10 that I was like, oh, that's a really great looking visual style, and Lorelei and the Laser Eyes was one of them.
Yeah, no. Where's the other one here? Europa was another one that it's a 3D action platformer. That looks kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of got a weird vibe, and I haven't gone back and pulled enough of the trailers. That game has shown up several times over the last few years. Yeah, done by Novadesk Entertainment. It's been in development since 2017. Creative director Helder Pinto. Game's been delayed at least once. It was announced in December 2022, shown at Gamescom in 2023, and was supposed to release in 2020. Was supposed to release late last year, but got pushed. But yeah, it has a weird kind of like it looks a little Zelda-ish, and I can't tell if the camera rotates or if it rotates with player control, or it's just that it repositions, but like the computer has control over like what the camera view angle is depending on the context. But yeah, it looked pretty dope. Looked like it had a neat story behind it of kind of sending a child off to kind of find the future for the given world that they were in or whatever. Looks like it has really beautiful kind of fluid movement. I guess I'm calling it a Zelda Metroidvania right now. But yeah, that was and the visual style is really striking on that one as well.
Yeah, no, the visual style is what really stood out to me. Like, it kind of gives you that Zelda vibes. What was the other one? I think that was it for me, at least. Ones I saw.
You didn't like Steam World Heist 2?
I saw that. I don't know. That comes out August 8th, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, that's a really strange one. It's a 2D side-scrolling, but turn-based tactical RPG. So I have not played any of the Steam World games. I know Tilemaster on Enough to Keep Going has. I'm sure lots of people in the chat have. But this might also be the thing that causes me to get on board as well, because obviously I'm currently playing a squad based tactical RPG in Grand Blue, not Grand Blue, Unicorn Overlord.
Yeah, I don't know if this game's for me.
Yeah, I also like it's there. This it also has real time nautical combat, and so that also kind of caught my eye too. It has job trees, skill trees, leveling for your characters, recruitment. So it has a lot of the kind of trappings and hangings of anything else would in that tactical RPG genre. So
yeah. One game that actually looked cool, that I think looks cool, is Bizit. Kind of gives you that retro, like 8-bit, generation feel to it. So I'm going to go back and watch that trailer. But is that something you might be interested in, Logic?
No, that was not one.
Okay. All right. So that's... I'm just going through the list. I mean, those are probably like the 3 games I talked about that I might be interested in. Whether or not I get to them is a different story.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry. I think I was muted, but yeah, I don't think I'll visit is one of the ones I'll go after. It looks a little too Defender, Gradius, Galaga-ish to me. I mean, just given that there were several other things on there that I thought I would play.
Although Yars Rising sounds interesting, though. I should say, anytime I hear Metroidvania and it being a reboot of the Atari classic Yars games like that, I'm like,
Well, it's actually. I mean, according to the studio, they actually think of it as a sequel. It is set somehow in the same universe as Yars Rising was, and I don't know Atari 2600 game lore, so I guess I'll have to go back and read that. But it is theoretically, I mean, they do talk about it as a sequel to Yars Rising.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. All right. All right, I got a super chat here. Another super chat from JD Gamer. The $5 super chat, thank you, JD, says Microsoft identified Tencent, Apple, and Google as its real competitors a long time ago. Google is currently getting cooked by regulators worldwide with Apple. Okay, thank you for that super chat, JD.
The other ones in the Nintendo Direct that I just like the looks of, although I don't know that I'll actually play them, is I was kind of intrigued by Little Kitty Big City, not based on the visual style, but because in the description and kind of a lot what I saw is like, this sounds a lot like Stray, just with like a different visual approach. Valley Peaks was one that had a really interesting visual style when I looked at it. I will not play Cat Quest 3, but again, I find the nautical combat in it in the way that it kind of evokes a little bit of Sid Meier's Pirates interesting. Was really interested to see how Shim turns out. So this was it was a weird kind of water puddle traversal game, but it looks like you can move between water puddles and maybe shadows. But it feels a lot like Frogger with kind of like a traversal tweak to it, being that you can only traverse through certain material in the game. That one hits 18 July, so it'll be interesting to see when it comes out. I think one of the things that I was most not surprised by, but I found most interesting about the Nintendo Direct, even though yes, I constantly hash people for as JD Gamer is doing tonight, constantly pom-pomming and talking about and console warring over business models instead of games.
Well, that's
just super weird to me.
Well, that's part of my frustration here. Like with just like, again, I wasn't really active on Twitter today, but the Direct happens, and with all the clamoring about AAA games not being sustainable, we need more AA's and indies, because and it's like, but no one's talking about the show, or I didn't see many people talking about the show.
Right. And instead of people talking about how awesome it will be for PC gamers to get a chance to play Ghost of Tsushima with all of the PC gaming drippings, the conversation immediately went to, oh, this shows Sony is going day and date.
Yeah. Or Sony was forced by Microsoft to do this. It's like, it's so, it's just so, instead of just celebrating what's happening here in the gaming industry, these great, like I'm looking at, Shim is not it doesn't look the kind of game that I would play, but I certainly appreciate the creativity I'm seeing here on the screen. Like that's the kind of stuff we should be talking about instead of, like you said, arguing over business models, arguing over whose hands being forced. It's so trivial. It's very inconsequential. It doesn't really impact any of us per se. Like, it's just enjoy your video games. You know, and this is,
early the community talked for 3 months about how, again, exclusives don't matter, and PlayStation and Nintendo are going to have to do the same thing Sony does, and how, certain influencers all came back from GDC saying everybody out here is saying the same thing. But yet no one talked about the LaToya Peterson presentation where she talked about, no, the real problem is how games are funded, and the way that a very, very small number of games get access to any of the funding, and how it all goes to the sure bets, and how money is right now it's like a big game of keep away from the games that are really trying to do something, creative. And then you wonder, while the industry is supposedly, upside down. But anyway, now I can't even remember what I was talking about.
Which we'll talk about too, by the way. That might be a good segue, but we'll certainly talk about that, because I did get a chance to read that article, and her perspective is kind of interesting because she comes out of
Hollywood and TV, journalism.
Yeah. She worked at Al Jazeera for a little bit. Went to the gaming industry. She says, like, she goes, when she got to the gaming industry, she realized things were eerily familiar with some of the challenges, some of the things she saw in terms of layoffs with some of these other industries that she was a part of. So, but we'll talk about that in a second here.
But the thing I did want to mention about the Nintendo Indie Direct is what I was really surprised to hear and super interested to see is that the vast majority of these games are at least timed exclusives, except if not a small handful were actually console exclusives to the Switch.
That's criminal.
They were. Some of these games were originally announced as only going to PC, and then. Then somewhere along the way between the time they were originally shown and were originally announced and discussed, they also became Switch exclusive. So I don't know if that means, Nintendo saw games and then went and reached out to people to get those games on the Switch platform and exclusive, or if the developers just decided of their own accord that it made sense for them to get it on the Switch, which is not that's not an easy step aside, right, from coding a game that's going to run unless they're doing it in Unity, coding a game that's going to run on an x86 platform and then talking about porting it to an ARM platform. So yeah, I just kind of picked up on that as the more and more of them came by and said timed exclusive or exclusive. So kind of interesting.
I'm curious to see what that benefits. Want to welcome with us the great gaming Forte. What's up, Forte?
What up, though?
How are you, Forte? I feel like I haven't talked to you in weeks, man.
I'm fine. I'm good. Just enjoying every little thing I'm doing.
Yeah. By the way, I do want to make a quick announcement while we have Forte here. We are working on getting a guest from Last Stand Media. It's not Colin, although we did have Colin on back in September of last year.
That was great.
Yeah, that was. Oh, you were there. It was a great show. Got to get Colin back on. But we're working on getting someone else from Last Stand Media to come on BRAP. So, yeah. So
get Cognito back on?
No, not Cognito. No, not him. This will be someone else. But yeah, Forte, did you get a chance to watch the Direct today?
No,
you didn't. Okay. Did you?
No.
Read any of the games? No, not interested.
No. No, it's not that I'm not interested. It's just that it's no reason for me, right? Okay, so you guys know I love Switch. I love my Nintendo Switch, but I haven't picked my Switch up in probably a month and a half at this point, because I'm at that point where I'm just ready for something else. So until they come out with that something else when it comes to the system, I'm just like, I'm just not interested in playing anything else on that system as of right now. I'm just like, I think when we were on DPS, me, Logic, and Slow-Mo were talking about it. Like, I have Unicorn Overload on Switch, and I haven't even started it yet because I just can't bring myself to turn my Switch on, because I'm just ready for something new from it. Not saying performance sucks or anything, but it's just, yeah, I've just kind of put it down for a while and just been playing other stuff.
Forte hates on the Nintendo Switch like Slow-Mo hates on Destiny 2.
Switch. I got more Switch stuff than probably most people here.
It's crazy. We're in the 7th year of the Switch, and it's just
I know
still more games coming.
It's just, I mean, yeah, it's good. It's they're not letting up. It's like, you know, you see most platform holders, once you get towards like the end of the generation, they start holding stuff for the next one. But you know, Nintendo hasn't done that. They might be doing that with some titles and stuff, but it doesn't seem like it because they're just consistently releasing things. But I also think that kind of bows for the point that there's going to be backwards compatibility. So you're going to be able to take the stuff you have now and move over to the whatever the new platform is going to be. So I think that's part of it. But yeah, it's just been interesting how gaming, especially for me, has kind of like changed a little bit over the last month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah, what do you mean by change? Like what? Like how's it changed for you, Forte?
Like, well, I'm more on the go now than anything else. Like,
okay,
gotcha, that's just it for me. Like, I still play Battlefield. I play Battlefield probably the most. Then I play Call of Duty whenever, you know, Slow-Mo and Taz kind of, you know, talk bad to me and say I'm not a good friend because I'm not playing with them. And then I break down and I go ahead and play that trash game with them. So that's kind of where that's at. But then for the most part, still just working out in the gym. And, you know, the funny thing is I'm so heavily in my Pokemon Go addiction. I'm like damn near trying to complete my Pokedex on all the regions now. So I've been heavily in that ever since last month. So I think last time I did some math on it, I think I was close to 400 hours in a month and a half on that game. So, man,
you're like me and Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's like different things kind of speak to, you know, and I'm more of a, I can, like, when I come home and play games, I can play by my, you know, I can play games by myself. It's not a problem with just booting up a game and jumping in and play by myself. I did it in Destiny. I do it in Battlefield all the time. But it's something to say when you have a community of people to do stuff with. Like the fact that I go out to, I like the other day I drove to the place called Rochester Hills. It's about 30 minutes from my house. I drove out there just for an event where they had a 3 hour community day where just a whole bunch of boosted spawns and stuff. I drove out there, met up with some people, had fun, 3.5 hours, got some stuff to drink after the fact. So it was like more of a community thing. And then my whole store, no lie, my whole store plays. And I literally in my private Discord, I have a group chat in there. I have a chat in there for just talking about Pokemon Go when it comes to our work thread and stuff. And I couldn't believe how many people actually jumped in there, was like, oh yeah, I have this and I have that. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. So that's kind of like where I'm at now. I just like being able to just go out, hang out with people and do stuff outside of just the normal. And then the fact that you kind of get tired of looking at all the crazy stuff that's happening in AAA gaming and stuff, you know, games coming out, not working day one like they're supposed to. And, you know, games not living up to expectations and stuff. And then mostly just the fact that I don't want to pay full price for some of these games day one, and I can just wait for them to go on sale and get them later, you know, especially if I'm not willing to play them day one. So I just kind of like do other things until I actually get that itch to want to come back and play. So that's just kind of where I am with gaming and stuff. So, but it's still fun. You know, I still play the things I need to play.
Yeah. By the way, Forte, Gregor Von Noob says you've never played Battlefield with him.
He's never asked me to play Battlefield 1.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Hey, I'll bring my S 137 character over there. It's great. It's fun. We got to get in there, man. I was playing earlier today, matter of fact.
Yeah. All right, I do want to move on, unless anyone else has any additional thoughts of the Nintendo Direct today.
How did you like the fact that Silk Song was not there and everybody thought it was going to be?
Everybody set themselves up for failure with that one.
Dude, did they forget that Xbox has a? They must forgot that Xbox has a marketing deal with them for that game. Do you really think that Nintendo is going to be the one that's going to like showcase a release date and everything for it?
No. I mean, I've forgotten that.
No, I didn't. Yeah, they ever since they announced that partnership and they had the exclusive rights to the marketing. I said if Xbox ain't announcing it, it ain't going nowhere else. So as soon as I saw all that on Twitter, I was like, y'all must have forgot. And granted, I get it because Xbox hasn't done anything or said anything of note, especially when it comes to games. They've been talking about pretty much hardware and backwards compatibility and stuff over the course of the last month. So I can kind of I feel people when they kind of forget that there's a big indie game that's coming out soon, and we're so used to Nintendo and PlayStation showcasing those games, you kind of forget that Xbox actually has the marketing to that, and it's not going to get talked about until Microsoft wants to talk about it.
Yeah, I just felt people were setting themselves up because they were digging at like little scraps.
Right.
Of what is it? Because it got rated by ESRB, and then somebody saw something on like a storefront or something like that, and they were like, "Oh, it's going to be announced." I was like, we need to understand that like we're in April right now. We have a slew of shows that are going to go on from now through July, and other than like repeating like past patterns of last year. Like we really don't have a lot of assurances of kind of what to expect across those shows.
No, I agree, 100%. But everybody is interested. That's the thing. And honestly, most of it's probably not for the right reasons. Most people are just interested to see who's going to have what, who's not going to have something, so they can use it against whoever they want to use it against. And like this dumb conversation we have on these social media platforms about these publications and stuff like that. So we'll see. But it is coming up to that time of year where a lot of stuff starts to come out. It's very interesting. Nintendo, still has a lot of stuff to talk about over the course of the year. Then Xbox hasn't said anything really about games or anything since January. So we're coming up to them in June because we're going to get something from them in June. And PlayStation is always the anomaly because we don't know. We already know that they don't have anything from a first party standpoint when it comes to their big tentpole franchises coming out this year. But that doesn't change the fact that we can still hear about stuff that's coming out, in the later parts of next year or early next year. So it's just real interesting to see when they're going to start talking about it. And with these whole PlayStation 5 Pro rumors being out there about everything that's happening with that, you would think that they would want to showcase some of their games that are going to be coming, like some of the improvements their games are going to see when it comes to that, and probably a couple of surprises about games that's going to be coming in the launch window of that system, so probably like early next year. So I think that's what a lot of people are really looking forward to from mostly PlayStation in general.
The only show that matters is the Ubisoft forward on June 10th.
What? Why?
The only show that matters is the PC show.
So you can be disappointed that
that's another true one.
Star Wars.
My scorecard from there forward from last year doesn't indicate quantitatively disappointment.
Well, I'm not saying it's disappointing every year.
Disappointment.
I'm not saying it's disappointing every year. What?
No, people are upset about that Java mission. By the way,
formula for you last year.
What's that? I'm sorry.
What was the winning formula from them last year for you?
My big winning formula for them is, I think I mentioned it on this show, or maybe even I mentioned on DPS. I can't tell. I'm doing, yeah. So, but what I liked is they did the thing in terms of messaging and marketing that none of the platform holders did, and that so many other shows didn't do. Like, I really feel like from a marketing and PR perspective that the platform owners in particular just lost the plot. Last year we were given so many games that like we walked away going, I don't know what the F that game is. Like, I mean, I was given a snippet of the story, but like, I don't know whether that game is an RTS or a first-person shooter or a tactical RPG. Like, and then you had to go off and go to like Xbox Wire, right, to read more about the games, and you had to go to the PlayStation blog to read. Like, and it wasn't a platform thing. It wasn't like a, Sony did it right, Microsoft did it right. Like unilaterally. Like, I was just really disappointed in the overall messaging of all the showcases from the platform owners last year. And then Ubisoft did the thing that I personally like. I know people constantly like, oh, we don't want to see developers come on stage. We don't want to hear from the developers, which is just super weird to me. But like, I liked, and I have always liked, like the Xbox show that I liked the most was the developer direct. Even though some of the business stuff shenanigans around it I didn't appreciate, but like what I want to see and what I want to hear is I want to hear the creatives come out on stage, tell me what their game is, walk through gameplay. Like I remember a time when, we used to bring Forza up on stage and, somebody would come out on stage with controller in their hand and actually play the game for like 10 or 15 minutes. And okay, maybe some of that was smoke and mirrors at some points. Maybe it was running on a PC and I don't really care. Right. But the point is that, I'm just picking at Forza as an example, but I mean, just unilaterally in terms of, particularly new IP, like just so many times these days we do, quite frankly, what Sony has historically done, and I have never liked all the years, right, of before the start of this generation, when we would constantly go to E3 or hear E3, and I would constantly, see online, oh yeah, Sony won E3, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Because it was just a big trailer palooza, and I don't like that. Like, trailer palooza does not do anything to me to convey like what the heck the thing is or why I should care or why it's important. I really like the Ubisoft format where they did pretty much for every single thing that they brought up on stage, they did some type of introductory trailer. They brought the creative director or one of the lead developers out on stage. They messaged and talked through a lot of the backstory of the game, and then they typically went into like a 5 to 10 minute snippet of gameplay, with them continuing to do voiceover and explaining to you what you were seeing and what you would experience in the game. And I just really, really appreciated that, and would prefer if more of the platform owners would go to that type of format.
I agree with that, but I do think it's harder for the platform holders themselves to do that, with the fact that unless they just omit third-party games, most third-party games from like their showcases and stuff, because I can see how Ubisoft Ubisoft can do that because it's just their games that they're talking about. EA even does that with EA Play, and EA Play is trash. Like, they don't do it right at all. They do game shows and they show off Command and Conquer, and I love Command and Conquer, but then they show off Command and Conquer for 40 minutes or 30 minutes and bore half the people that's watching. Like, oh, this is an event for the people that's there, but okay, but you're televising this. So how about you entertain the people that are watching at home? So I do agree with that. I just think it's a little harder for the platform holders to live up to that expectation, unless they're going to omit a lot of the third-party traffic that they're going to do, especially with some of the marketing deals that they have. And that's probably more for PlayStation than Xbox, because Xbox does have some, but PlayStation has way more of them. So that's where I kind of think with that.
I mean, my thing is they occupy time because again, this is the thing that makes me cranky, right? It's like, now I'm really about to get salty. So like so many years, like we've debriefed like the showcase or whatever on E2KG, and DBQ does a really good job. He's a guy who will like watch all the pre-shows and stuff, and I am a super obstinate person about like, if you don't market to me what your thing is in the show that you gave me a time for, don't expect me to give a crap about something that you showed in the 30-minute pre-roll, right, with Sydney or whoever from IGN. Like your show is at 10 a.m. right? PST. 1 p.m. EST. Like that is your show. Don't expect me to understand or know or be aware of and I'm like, so many times they've done those pre-shows and they've pocketed other times to convey information that to me is actually relevant. And I'm like, you guys could have taken some of these Trailer Palooza things that don't say a damn thing and put it in those times, right? And I don't really care whether it's first party or third party. I'm like, look, make the show. Ubisoft showed 12 games last year, right, during their thing, right, in predominantly that format. They had one or two, and I'm not even counting like the. Maybe I am counting some of the expansions or DLCs. I don't know. I don't think I'm counting all the expansions and DLCs. But like they covered 12 games during that time slot in predominantly that format. And I'm like, the platform owners could do that. Like take your 10 to 12 games that are ready, right, to show that amount of content and have that extensive of a discussion and make that your priority. And the stuff that you just have Trailer Palooza for, like you don't even know what the damn game is. Like don't take my time showing me that right during your showcase. Put that in your pre-roll. Or make that a webisode on your freaking official YouTube channel or something.
Right. And the last thing I'll say on that is you're right, but the masses are completely against that because they're the one, because all we hear people talk about when they do what you say you don't like that they do, when people are doing their, reviews or something for these showcases, people says, "Oh man, it was great. They cut out all the fluff. It was game after game after game. It was trailer after trailer after trailer. It wasn't too much people going up there talking on stage about other things." And I like the fact that they left it after the showcase, so you got more information from developers after the showcase about the things that I know are more important to you that you wish that they did during the showcase, and they kind of cut some of the other stuff out. I think it's just more of an attention span thing because the majority of people that are watching these things are watching it to be entertained versus it's a very small subset of people like yourself that really look at it for the information that they can gather from it along, during that time frame. And they don't want to have to cut an extra 30, 40, 50 minutes out of their day for something that kind of could have been explained during that same, time frame. I guess it's just you're serving two different audiences when it comes to that, and it just happens to be the ones that watch the showcase in real time that enjoy that other type of content where it's just a blitz of content. Those are the ones that they cater to the most.
I like my Trailer Paloozas. I'll just throw that out there.
Well, I know a lot of people
would you be surprised. I actually like both. I do like those deep dives and gameplay footage. I know Logic mentioned was it Forza Horizon as an example. I do miss that, but I do enjoy the trailers. I don't mind them so much. And by the way, Logic, speaking of Forza Horizon, I did try out the steering wheel gear shift brake.
Did you really?
Yeah, let me tell you, and the pedals.
Oh, your life changed, didn't it?
Oh, let me tell you something. I was, of course, my son's playing. He's playing Forza Horizon 5 on PC, as he should. It's the definitive Xbox experience. PC is, and actually, I said this last week. If you're looking for the Xbox Pro,
oh man, here we go.
You need only look at. What'd you say, Forte?
I said, "Oh, Lord, here we go."
Hey, you need only look at PC for the Xbox Pro experience. It's the definitive platform for all things Xbox. But
the funny thing, the only funny thing that comes, the only true thing that came out of all those Forza experiences that you were talking about, Logic, where they had a person come out on stage and showcase the game and all this other stuff. The only thing that we knew for 100% certain was real was the car that they brought out and put on stage next to it. That's the only thing we know that was 100% real. Everything else, the gameplay could have been real. I do think the gameplay was kind of real, but we never knew if it was playing on PC or console. We never knew if they were just up there holding a controller and actually controlling it versus looking at the screen and like, oh, this is great. But we knew that car was real because they made sure that they drove that car out there, and we knew that was real.
Yeah, and my only thing for that is, and I'm gonna and I'm gonna let it go. I get it. Nobody wants the same thing I want. I mean, my comment to that is
I understand what you want.
Those are the same people who don't want to pay $70 for games and don't buy enough indies and don't buy enough AA games, but then constantly complain about the industry isn't doing what they need. But anyway, what I would say is, by the same token, I mean, it was an absolute miracle that anything on that iPhone demo worked when Steve Jobs took the stage in 2007. But nobody talks about that. What people talk about is they talk about how Steve messaged and explained to them why they should care about the iPhone.
Oh yeah,
well, that's true.
Yeah. Well, that's also another different audience too.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I would say, Logic, about my experience with the pedals and the steering wheel and the gear shift and the handbrake. I mean, it was it was game changing, man. It really was.
Which one did you get?
Which what?
So you bought a steering wheel setup?
No. I did not. My oldest, my 15-year-old did. He turns 15 in July. He bought the.
Oh, which one did he buy?
He got a Logitech steering wheel, and then he got like the
G920.
I
or
think
G923 for PlayStation.
No,
he said Forza, so it's got to be 920 or 923.
I think at the 920.
Yeah, it's the 920.
I think I read it to you earlier today, Logic, right?
Yeah, I think it's the one that works with Xbox and PC Forte. So I think it's the 920 or 929 or whatever.
So you got the so we got that. And
it's nice. $300.
Nice.
Woo.
It's nice.
Or $200.
Yeah, I had to explain to BRAP how much that meant his son had spent.
Yeah, now I know. I'm like, wait a minute, like he got like the frame that you put the wheel on, and you put the pedals, and it holds the
frame too.
Yeah, it holds the gear shift.
Not the sit down one, Forte.
You got to be explained. I'm like, no, he did not get the whole. That man going. He's Marty Andretti now.
No, he didn't get like the cockpit type. He got the one where it's just the frame that holds up the steering wheel.
Oh, so he can hold the steering wheel and he can slide in the shifter and everything.
Yeah,
those things are nice, man. I have the I used to have the 920 before I upgraded. It's super nice, man, and force feedback and everything. You can feel the road. It's nice.
That's the thing. I could feel like the gravel, the road, and like the tension. If I was like coming around the curve like too fast, and so and I grew up. I learned how to drive using manual transmission. That's how I learned how to drive, and so it was like and now my current vehicle doesn't have manual; it's automatic. But every vehicle up until this vehicle I own now was all manual transmission. Like I wouldn't drive anything else. And so it was cool to be able to like use the clutch to downshift and all this. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was definitely like I think if you're going to play racers, that's the way to go.
The thing to understand before you get head over heels.
Yeah.
Is your son, I would assume your son probably spent some time setting that up. And the one thing and I'm not talking about physically, I'm talking about in software and tuning it. So I just want to caution you that the thing to understand is like I have two sets of wheel and pedals. Whenever I connect them right to it depends on what PC I'm using it with. It depends what game, and it especially depends on what game I'm playing, and all those tunings are different. And so every time, and I play some racers that are really like Byzantine, right? And trying to get them set up correctly. There's this one dude's site that I always go to and like follow his recipes, but like I have to do that every single time. So it's not like if you play one racing game, like it's really super cool. You set it up once and like, but if you're playing multiple racing games, it's a bit of a pain, right? How you have to tune them and tweak them each time for each single one.
Yeah, and if you want to get a wheel that makes it so you have different profiles for setting them up and stuff, you're spending thousands of dollars for a wheel.
Yeah. Logic had mentioned to me earlier that it's an expensive proposition. It's not cheap. So it's
you're buying real parts.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that people don't realize. You're not just people think when you're buying.
I mean, his
racing wheel, you're buying parts for a car, literally.
His gear shift is legit. Like it feels like a real gear shift, and the handbrake's like really legit. I'm like, what? Like this thing feels like a handbrake, like in a vehicle. Like it's just I mean it's. But I tell you, it's just like with the most I ever spent on a wheel setup is about $400 for my latest wheel setup. I spent more for my yoke and throttle for Flight Sim. I spent almost $650 for that.
Do you have the Warthog Forte?
Yes.
Whew.
Yes, man. And brother, you know how that thing feels.
Yeah. Even with all the flight sims and stuff I play, like I don't mind having, like I have a few different flight control systems, but like even I haven't felt like I've been that I've played them consistently enough to warrant plunking down for a Warthog.
Yeah, that's the only one. Like, because I love flight sims more than I love them more than racing. So I always told myself if I'm going to spend that much money on racing, I have to get the best that I can get for air sims and stuff. So
yeah, during the pandemic, those things were like GPUs. Like they got priced ridiculously high for you to get a hold of one.
Yeah, and those things are like I have the Warthog. I have a F-18 flight stick, an official one. I forget the name of the actual throttle that I have. I got to look it up because it's been so long. I had it for like 3 years now. But yeah, it's nice. And those are heavy pieces, man. You're talking about just the Warthog by itself weighs about 15, 20 pounds.
Yeah, but I get you on the wheel and pedals though, BRAP. I mean, it's a different game.
It is
completely different game.
It really is. It definitely is. I mean, it was. Yeah. I don't know. I couldn't play a racer again using controller. I couldn't do it.
We need to go play some DCS. Yeah. I know you got DCS Logic.
I do. It's on my it's my board for this week. We'll see if it comes up in the rotation.
Yeah, let me.
We need to jump in there and play some DCS.
Let me get the super chat real quick. JD Gamer $2 super chat says, "Shout out to Gaming Forte. Hey Forte, big shout out to you Forte.
Hey, haven't seen him actually, I haven't. Yeah, he hasn't been up there in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so
I'll probably see him tomorrow.
Yeah, so I do want to get into, and you brought this up earlier, Logic at GDC, this year's GDC. Latoya Peterson discussed some of the challenges that game studios are having with regards to I can't even talk today, funding. And she talks about, and this is someone who and I know you mentioned this earlier, Logic, that somebody who has a background in, what was it? She worked for ESPN, so journalism, Al Jazeera. Did she spend some time in Hollywood too, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. I think she said she was with one of the networks, ran a newsroom or something like that. I gotta double check.
Yeah. So let's see here. So I came from journalism. A lot of journalism for the last 10 years has been managing through downturns and layoffs over and over. She was at ESPN for 3 years, and Al Jazeera for in 2014 she was there. But she talks about just making that transition over to the video game industry, and that a lot of the challenges that she saw coming out of journalism, TV, she started seeing those things in the gaming industry when she made that transition. She says, "Hey, it was eerily familiar." And she's talking about at GDC. She's talking about the issue with funding in video games, and that what's happened is companies who are laying off some of their workforce, they do that to increase cash flow. And so, one of the things that she talks about is that layoffs that we're seeing, that she says we're seeing layoffs as a solution to cash flow problems. She says the argument that I'm making today is that, we have the whole fear about the invisible hand that controls the markets. particularly there's a lot we can talk about in capitalism and free market economy, but in the games industry, funding is that invisible hand that is controlling labor. So she talks about, venture capitalists, private equity firms, and even having to try to plead, I guess, your case, if you will, and more often than not, they may feel like, well, you know what, if you're not doing this thing or doing this thing we want you to do, we're not going to fund your game. And she shared one story of a game that they had presented for funding. I believe it was a publisher, and that particular game, they were like, yeah, that's a great idea, but we've never tried that idea or targeted that audience, so we wish you the best of luck. So these are some of the challenges, and I think these are things that many of us probably aren't aware of. And I think this article and the conversation she had, the speech that she had at GDC kind of gives us a little insight into the dynamics of funding in video games and how challenging that can be for smaller studios. And one of the things was kind of interesting, throughout the acquisition merger, the M&A of Activision Blizzard King, one of the things that I remember was kind of talked about a lot was that, now, if Microsoft buys Activision, we'll have unions in video games, and unions are going to solve all the problems. And I've seen people respond to the layoffs that we've seen over the last year. They've said, this is why we need more unions I can't even talk to them, sorry. This is why we need more unions in video games. And she cites J.C. Lau, who's mentioned unions being a powerful form of collective action. But for those who came from journalism or film, where unions are plentiful, one of the things you learn is that unions don't fix cash flow. They cannot help, and they cannot help in that respect. They might be able to negotiate a better severance package, but they can't fix a structural issue like funding. So, if we're looking at layoffs to address cash flow issues in the gaming industry, and unions aren't going to help in that regard. And she's saying that based on what she's seen and the journalism and film industries, where unions are, as she mentioned, unions are plentiful there. So she says, yeah, go ahead.
And we've talked about on this show how, right, for certain employees, unions are actually damaging right during the layoff process because they don't prevent layoffs from happening. And typically, what they bargain for in collective bargaining is they establish guardrails where the people who are favored are the people who are senior. And so what that means is if you're a mid-level person on the come up and you're actually more talented, right? Because this is often a problem, particularly in the technology realm. One of my sayings I always use with my employers is I'm not going to wait in line. Like I'm not going to sit here and hang out with somebody ahead of me just because they're more senior if I'm the more talented person. Like that's not logical for me. So one of the things unions do is they'll negotiate to protect those senior people when sometimes those senior people are retired on duty, or they're not the people they're camped out right on a project that they know they can do well that isn't necessarily challenging them in terms of learning curve, while your younger generation and younger workforce are sometimes getting the more arguably challenging assignments. But those are the ones who are let go.
Yeah. So she, as I mentioned, she says, but unions cannot fix a structural issue like funding. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on and what's impacting the labor market, how games are funded, how indie studios are funded, and how even large studios are still at the mercy of this house of cards that is the funding system that we've built. So she's talking about, again, even the larger studios are having issues with money, and we've heard about that logic. I mean, if you've been, for those who've been following the gaming industry closely post COVID, that's kind of one of the things that I've read is that there was a lot of money. There was kind of almost I don't want to say gold rush, but there's a lot of money being pumped into gaming development and to prop up studios during the big COVID boom with the gaming industry, and now that money's kind of dried up now. We're not seeing that level of funding that we saw during that COVID boom period.
Well, one of the most telling metrics in her presentation, right, was look at who's getting funded. You'll start to notice it's a very winner take all. According to PitchBook, last year there were 572 deals done representing about $4.1 billion, but that was poured into 500 studios. Right, so that's the bulk of the investment that was made, right, for those smaller studios and indies. It went to 500 studios. Now you consider the fact that those 500 studios, some number of them didn't necessarily publish a game last year, right? But then you think about the fact that 14,000 games get published to Steam each year. So $4.1 billion in investment funds went into those smaller scale studios. They went to 500 studios. Even if each one of them published one game next year, last year, you're talking about 13,500 studios, right? Or at least game titles that didn't get investment funding. And when you talk about the percentage of those that are indies, you're talking about, as I've constantly tried to tell people, you're talking about people who are literally mortgaging their houses, working out of their garages to try and make a game, or working a full-time job and doing their game on the back end, and their game then takes them 8 years to get out. 8 years during which, by the way, you cross the isthmus. That was 2018, when Steam basically said, we're no longer gate guarding, curating, or doing approval for games. And the number of games published to Steam has gone from 8,000 before 2018 to 10,000 after 2018 to 14,000 last year. And again, you realize that means, what did I say earlier in the show, that 9 companies roughly make about 65 to 68% of the gaming revenue in the gaming industry. And you have that number of games and studios fighting for the remaining 32%. And then on top of that, we have data showing that, I can't remember exactly what the number is, but it's something like the top 100 games on Steam made like 75% of the revenue. That most games on Steam don't even break 100, don't even break, I'll have to go back and look at that, but don't break the boundaries that would really tell you that, things were, profitable.
Yeah. One of the other things she discussed is publishers. She said that with her studio that they went the publisher route and it wasn't successful due to publishers' often narrow criteria. She said the necessity for your game is to fit in their preferred box. She also said there's so many ideas, so many talented folks who want to create games, but when you're trying to find someone that's going to fund your game, a lot of times your vision is too far outside of that. You may not even ever get funding regardless of the quality of your idea. And she gives the example I just mentioned about one of her favorite publisher rejections was essentially all green lights. They loved the concept. They loved what they were doing. They agreed that the market they were serving, games of color and women in particular, was underserved. They knew this was important. They could see the cultural impact, but the response to them was, we've never tried to speak to this audience. We're not going to be able to help you. We hope it works. One of the other examples she gave was, let's see here. Which one was this? She mentioned that big studios aren't protected from some of these headwinds that indies are experiencing. She points to the example of Volition, which was shut down by Embracer Group in August 2023 after 30 years of existence. She says Saints Row is an enormous franchise, and if you look at what happened, a $2 billion deal with the Savvy Games Group fell through, and that took out the studio. Once again, gaming funding is essentially a house of cards when you're jumping from deal to deal, hoping that you can get enough runway to last, get you ahead, or cash back out before you run out of money and opportunity. And for most people, when they play that game, they lose. So, a lot of at least my takeaway reading this article and reading her presentation here, kind of speaks to, or say my takeaway was that, I think what often gets lost in the conversation is that people oversimplify, I think, the conversation around the gaming industry. And, they'll say things like, oh, we need more indie games, or AAA games are sustainable. Then there was another article today where I think this was Video Game Chronicle said, and I'd have to pull this article up, but essentially the title of the article was 70% of game developers believe that live service games aren't sustainable. And I saw your tweet, by the way, Logic, when you said, look, let's just throw up our hands. Gaming isn't sustainable. But these are complex issues. These are complex challenges that the industry faces that people aren't aware of, or people oversimplify. And one of the things she said, look, we're facing a crisis, and this crisis is being sparked by funding. She's talking about the challenge in what we're seeing right now in the gaming industry. She's like, the vast majority of people never get venture capital to fund projects, particularly for Black women entrepreneurs. We got, and this was last year when it was still okay, 0.6% of all venture capital funding. That number is still small in games. So, again, my takeaway was that this, again, is a conversation that's being had, that's being oversimplified, where there's a lot of moving parts, where it's high risk, high reward, the gaming industry, where it's not easy to get funding. It's a very volatile industry. But, Logic and Forte, but that's, to me, that's always been the case with the industry. It's to me, it's always been a very volatile industry. You look at what's happened to platform owners over the last 30, 40 years. You look at the downfall of Atari. You look at the downfall of the industry. The industry essentially collapsed in 1983.
Well, the industry in the U.S.
Yes, yes, the U.S. Yeah,
because the rest of the world's gaming industry was thriving at the time.
Yeah, you see what happened to Sega. They no longer make consoles. How many the 3DO, the Atari Jaguar. There's the different studios that have closed over the last 20, 30 years. So that was my takeaway from reading this article. I thought it was very insightful. It's one of the things that there were certain content creators say, oh, I'm hearing this at GDC, but this is one of the things they didn't hear. And one of the things they probably should have been paying attention to, in my opinion. So,
yeah, we have other ripples like the thing that happened when EA just out of nowhere totally blindsided everybody with dropping the Command and Conquer Remake bundle on Steam, and we heard from developers who had their game scheduled to be released that week. This is what I talk about when I talk about the indie dev who was working. She was working a full-time day job and then working on her game on the back end. She'd worked on it for 8 years, and she publishes that day, and then EA comes along out of nowhere and says, "Oh, here's the entirety of the Command and Conquer series remade, or remastered, and it's available." And she's like, "And my sales just tanked, because of this big AAA, monster devouring revenue beast, right? That just comes along casually and drops something out of his back catalog out of nowhere without any of us being aware of it. And in a moment, my hopes and dreams of almost a decade, were just dashed."
Yeah. Yeah. Nerds and Other Legends. The point of this topic is, one, it's a news story, number one. Two, it's to provide some additional insight, nuance to how challenging game development it can be, because people tend to oversimplify that. So that's
the point of the article, the point of the discussion is because a very large volume of people have taken to Twitter and created a narrative out of very common, typical boilerplate statements that have been repeated by the listeners of that podcast, and they haven't dug into the deeper nuances and the deeper sophistication and the deeper complexity of the industry. And those are the things that we talk about here. So if you don't want to hear them, you don't need to be here. And if you just came here to hear the same 10 bullet points that literally everybody has been saying on Twitter for the last 3 months, then again, that's another reason for you to not be here.
Yeah, so very insightful article. Again, by GameIndustry.biz. If you're not following or getting the news from GameIndustry.biz, I highly suggest you do. They have some great articles, some great insight into industry trends. It's where I mostly get a lot of my gaming related news. So anyhow, any other thoughts on this particular topic before we move on to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? All right. Let me pull this article up here. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. All right. There was an article earlier this week by VGC. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth is underperforming sales-wise, analysts claim. So this according to Z Huge, as he's known, Z Huge on Twitter, or Daniel Ahmad. He's Director of Research Insights at Nokia Partners. He said the PS5 game has been faring worse than its predecessor following its release in February. Rebirth is underperforming sales-wise. It's selling about half what Remake sold in the same time frame. It looks like it'll have a weaker tail prior to any PlayStation Plus-like release. And shipments of the game topped 3.5 million in its first 3 days, according to publisher Square Enix, which hasn't announced Rebirth sales data. In comparison, Rebirth was released a few months after PS5 hit 15 million in sales. So there's also another article, Logic. I think you pulled this, that at least in Japan, retail sales of
was that the one that it was like the biggest launch ever in Japan?
Yeah, it was,
or second or third, something like that.
Second largest PS5 launch behind Final Fantasy 16, I think. I think that's what it was. Yeah. So, all right. So this article comes out, right? And I see, again, content creators, influencers running with this. Well, hey, so-and-so said, maybe, he'd love to see this game on Xbox. This might be good for everyone. He might have been right about this, seeing how sales aren't stellar as projected. And so I'm just going to do a quick rant here, gentlemen. So bear with me here. Let's
go.
This is my issue. He said, let's go. This is my issue with influencers and content creators. They take this news story and they don't provide any nuance or context to, like, they're not even looking at a couple things here, which should be obvious if you're in games media, you're an influencer, you're a content creator.
If you're alive and breathe oxygen,
yes,
you should understand how the release of Final Fantasy Remake compares in the time of the world and the market to Rebirth.
Yeah, like that should be number one. You should understand that when Remake came out, it was during the pandemic. We had just gotten into lockdown. And I remember I was like, holy shit, I'm not going to be able to go out. I'm not going to be able to see friends or family. And honestly, for me, Final Fantasy Remake was a great way to escape from that craziness at that time period, right? The pandemic was so new. We didn't have vaccines. We couldn't go out anywhere. We were told to social distance. I mean, it was
toilet paper was a short supply. Like if people are fans of The Walking Dead, like literally like those scenes from like season 2 where like Rick Grimes and Shane were like pulling out the freaking road atlas on the hood of the F-150 and trying to map out where grocery stores were and where they could potentially make runs to get toilet paper. That was literally me at the time when Final Fantasy Remake came out. Like, that was the state of the world. Animal Crossing also released, like, right in that time frame, actually, like, just days after we went into lockdown.
I still believe Final Fantasy would not have sold as great as it did if it wasn't for the pandemic.
Well, I don't, Forte, I can't say I disagree with that, or because you're
Final
right.
Fantasy, it would have sold good, but it wouldn't have sold as good.
But I mean, think about it. It was a time where we were like looking for ways to escape, and Logic isn't lying about toilet paper. I mean, like I remember you can only buy one pack of toilet paper. I'm like, nah, I'm buying everything, and you're not going to stop me.
I still have a picture in my phone from when we were in Kroger's, the grocery store here. Mm-hmm. And me and my daughter was walking past the toilet paper and
the shelves were empty.
Aisle, and literally there was nothing in there. And I always keep that picture in my phone. And I was like, yeah, just remember this was like not even 4 years ago.
I mean, hand sanitizer was gone. Bleach was gone. Cleaning spray was gone. I mean, it was madness. I mean, I remember like spraying down our packages, that were coming in because we just didn't know. But anyhow, that should be obvious. Yeah. That should be obvious here. If you're making this tweet and you're covering the industry, you're on a podcast that many people watch, that should be the amount of the fact that you're admitting those things is it's to me, it's just frustrating because it just dumbs down the conversation. It doesn't add any value to the conversation. The fact that Final Fantasy Remake also launched on a console that had over 100 million user install base at the time during a pandemic. Yeah, no shit, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth is underperforming compared to its predecessor. You're talking about a game that was released on a platform with 15 million consoles sold. I mean, we just talked about the post. We talked about it on this show. We talked about the post-COVID world in gaming. We're seeing that play out. So it's just another example of content creators, influencers talking out of the left butt cheek and not adding any nuance or context that should be included when they're having these conversations. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I want to mention too is this idea that somehow Xbox would have been the solution to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth underperforming sales in comparison to Remake.
Oh man, I already know who we talking about here.
Now, I want to say something here. Okay. No.
Man, here we go.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth doesn't need Xbox. And you have to imagine that companies, if you understand how companies work, we just talked about funding. It's funny when I hear people say, oh, those greedy corporations. No shit, Sherlock. You just wake up today to figure out that corporations are greedy and they want your money. Of course they do. Of course they want your money. Of course they're greedy. I mean, capitalism is the basis of capitalism is based on making money. It's about greed. I mean, that's another rant. But this idea that somehow, this is proof why it should have been on Xbox. Well, you're assuming then that Square Enix and developers will often look at how the buying patterns, buying behavior of consumers of certain platforms, decide what games go on what platforms, and how historically how their games are sold on certain platforms. But there's also something called money hatting, which is what Sony's probably done here in the case of Final Fantasy VII, where Sony has given Square Enix X amount of dollars to keep the game exclusive on the PlayStation, which benefits Square Enix. You got to imagine Square Enix is probably doing the calculations, doing the math, and saying, hey, as we say on the show, is the juice worth the squeeze? Does it make sense for us to take this money? Does that money we're taking from Sony, does it make sense for us to take that money? Or does it make sense for us to spend additional money, time, resources on developing for the Xbox platform, and not just having to develop for the Xbox platform, but having to develop for two different SKUs? We also know that the director of Final Fantasy VII said, hey, doing so on PlayStation 5 allow us to execute on and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, allow us to create the kind of game that we wanted to create. So you have to imagine that they're looking at these things and running the numbers and doing the calculations, because this is what businesses do. They don't lick their fingers and point their fingers out the window of their car and see which way the wind's blowing. They don't do that. A lot of these decisions are calculated. And so at some point they're probably thinking, you know what? It's more advantageous for us to take this money from Sony to release the game on Final Fantasy, or to release the game on PlayStation 5 and this will allow us to kind of create the game that we want to create. Okay.
Only optimize it for one hardware SKU. I don't understand the logic. I don't understand how you skip from the logic of, hey, we shouldn't be paying $70 for games. These games come out and they're broken. The answer to that is put the games on every platform.
Yeah,
because if you follow that through line, it means you're now going to have to hardware optimize for multiple platforms, which is more expensive, requires more LOE, more engineering labor hours, increases the complexity of your delivery targets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, but
well, that's the point. It's like this is why it's funny. We talked about that last article, and it's like we wanted to give people some additional insight into how the industry works, and this is the part that I get frustrated with, because these are individuals who are fans of video games but don't care to do their homework about the gaming industry and then go on podcast. Some of these individuals are influencers that are on larger podcasts that don't walk these things through, and with the and with the whole Xbox conversation, that this is proof that it would have helped Xbox. Well, you got to imagine that Square Enix is also looking at how Final Fantasy 15 did on the Xbox One, and it actually only Xbox One sales accounted for, I think it was probably being generous here, by about 10% of all sales of Final Fantasy 15. And so then you have to look at that, and you have to look and consider, is the juice worth the squeeze? Does it make sense for us to invest additional money, as you mentioned, Logic, resources to optimize, to port, to create a game on another platform where we may not get that investment back? Where the juice might not be worth the squeeze. Or do we take that money from Sony and create the game that we want, optimize it for one piece of hardware, and kind of deliver the experience we want gamers to have? So that's my rant, and that is a conversation that should be had, as opposed to, oh well, look, it's underperforming. Xbox will cure these sales woes. No, that's not grounded in any sense of reality, in my opinion. Let me grab this super chat here real quick from before I go to you, Forte and Logic, from Shivansu Prasad with the $5 super chat. It says Final Fantasy narrative about bad sales being pushed by bots because of exclusivity with disinformation. Very disingenuous. SC Switch exclusives. Square Enix Switch exclusives not talked about. That is true. They're not talked about because Square Enix does have exclusives on the Nintendo Switch. And then Shivansu Prasad with the $2 super chat again says it's likely they want Final Fantasy 7 to look bad for exclusivity. So, Forte, Logic, either one of you jump in. What are your thoughts?
What was the question again?
Forte wasn't paying attention.
Oh no, I was reading something when you said it, and yeah, I just didn't hear it.
No. What are your thoughts about the sales of Final Fantasy 7?
Oh, we're still talking about
Rebirth.
Oh, we're still talking about Final Fantasy.
Yeah,
I thought you asked a different question.
Yeah.
It's understandable. I feel like expectations for a lot of things are kind of out of whack, based especially coming off of the pandemic. That's why you started seeing so many studios downsizing over the course of the last 2 years when it comes to, just their footprint, because they expanded heavily to meet the rising demand of games of people sitting at home, and people that were probably traditional gamers growing up, but then found other things in life that took its place, like, probably working 2 jobs or having a family or going back to school. A lot of that stuff kind of got, well, not the family part, but, a lot of the other stuff like working and school got put on the back burner, for a good 5 to 6 months for a lot of people. So it kind of brought people back into a medium that they hadn't been into in a while. And yeah, games definitely thrived off of that. Final Fantasy 7 was always, in my opinion, going to do well, just due to the fact that it's Final Fantasy 7, and It was one of those games that a lot of people definitely wanted to see and get a second chance and an impression of what it's going to be, modernized in 2000 at that time, 2020. But just off of a lot of the conversations that people had after it came out, there was a very mixed opinion on the game. Like, a lot of people didn't like the direction they went in. They didn't like the fact that they changed up some of the stories. Some people wish they would have kind of just with the pixel art more like what's the name of the freaking game? I love the game. Octopath Traveler and stuff like that. People was hoping that they would kind of went with a style and look like that. And of course they saw trailers and gameplay elements showing that it wasn't like that, but I think they changed a little bit of the game to the point where a lot of people were kind of like put off by it. So they enjoyed the first part of it. And then they said, I don't need to play the second part of it because it's not even the same Final Fantasy that I grew up on. And I still hear that from a lot of people today. So I'm not surprised that the second part isn't selling as well. And I also think a lot of people just wanted to just play the traditional Final Fantasy storyline and not have it broken up over 3 different entries. Now, it's a good chance that the last entry, when they finally come out with everything and they do like a, franchise of the year collection that has all 3 of them when it finally released, that probably sells the best of all of them because it's going to be a singular package with everything. And the people that didn't play any of these will just do it then. It's a good chance that might happen too. But just due to the sentiment of how people felt about the direction they went with it, I feel like that's part of it. But then nobody was going to be able to live up to like the amount of sales that you got during the pandemic. And even Final Fantasy 7 didn't even sell as great. It just sold better than it probably would have sold if it wasn't during that time too. So Rebirth is kind of being held to a standard that it can't live up to when it comes to those type of sales metrics this time around.
The other thing people are doing is people are
Logic just had to take a side.
Trying to not go through the roof. So we're as is so frequently the case in the gaming conversation, we're also comparing data that is apples and oranges.
Yeah,
we are looking at opening weekend sales, as we talked about during the pandemic when we were 1 month into lockdown. Final Fantasy 7 Remake made 3.5 million opening weekend sales because the world could not leave their homes. Right? We're extrapolating data on what Final Fantasy 7 Remake has done because as far as I can tell, I don't think there's been any official sales data put out by Square Enix.
Yeah, no physical or digital sales. Where I remember PlayStation put out digital sales within the first week of the game being out that it hit a certain threshold. So
right, so people are looking at daily active users and doing extrapolation. That's fine, and it's fine to come up with an educated hypothesis that means the game has not sold as well. Again, I could not look at any data and probably tell you I would assume that Final Fantasy Rebirth did not have the same opening weekend, right, as Final Fantasy 7 Remake did, just like I would assume that a Marvel movie released during the pandemic did not have the same opening weekend as an Infinity Saga MCU movie did pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. Right? There's certain logical leaps that you can make without looking at data. But the other thing is, then there are people comparing the total sales of Final Fantasy VII over several years to where Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is now. Like, neither is statistically applicable or correct. So there's causality and reasons for the number being lower. We don't have any official numbers, so a lot of the arguing is over foolishness and people trying to contrive something to look a certain way when we don't actually know. And again, I'm fine with not having concrete numbers, but from a time periodicity and framework, we're also comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah.
I'll also say it's kind of crazy that we're comparing these games in general sales wise due to the fact that it was a cross generational game.
Yeah,
it's like 100. There was only 50. Like when it came out on PlayStation 5, there was only 15 million systems out. But when it came out on PlayStation 4 in April 10th, it was 120 million consoles out there.
Well, that is kind of what it's frustrating, Forte.
That's the part that I think people just don't, think about, when they kind of say stuff like that. It's like we're talking about literally apples and oranges, because you're talking about a game that released at the very tail end of a generation and is being buffered once again at the beginning of a new generation with a higher value, a SKU that costs more money, has more, of course it has more bells and whistles added to it because they added the integrate to it. So it's the integrate bundle with the DLC and everything. 15 million copies of the game, system are out there for people to buy. I just think that there's only what rumored 45 to 50 million PlayStations out there since the last announcement, which is not even half of what PlayStation 4 had at the beginning, towards the time that it did release, and then not even buffered by the 15 million that PlayStation 5 had. So really, if you think about it, what's that, a 35 million console difference between PlayStation, the time when that game came out on PlayStation 5 to where it is now? So we're not even a half of the way to what PlayStation 4 was at when Final Fantasy 7 Remake released. So of course you would think more opportunities at the Apple, you're going to yield more sales.
And there's also some silliness in this scenario, right? That Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth is selling less, so the solution to that was to also put it on Xbox, which would have meant that in the timeline between Remake and Rebirth, you would have needed more development time at an increased cost to sell to a lower addressable market of 27 million consoles, right, in comparison to the PlayStation 5. So let's just start with the assumptive theory that, okay, you would have sold more than people are projecting now have been sold on PlayStation 5 in total, but you would have sold, right, at a ratio less on Xbox. So does that really move the cheese, right, for you to do that additional investment if you're now not deploying the game till next year or the year after, and you lose any investment money from Sony that they made to make the game exclusive?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point, Logic.
All interesting facts.
Yeah. It's just, again, that's I wanted to have this conversation because, again, you have influencers, content creators that aren't giving the conversation the nuance and context that it deserves, which tends to be the case. So,
again, that all being said, I think there's a justifiable argument or a complaint to be made to say, hey, I really wish Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was on Xbox, right? That's totally fine. But just the linkage of, because the sales are low, that is proof that it should have been on Xbox, right? When you're just entirely skating by a very complex investment, revenue, profitability question, there's neither any logic to the argument that you're making, but there's also no point in making that argument, because your argument could simply say, my preferred platform is Xbox. I really wish the game was on Xbox, and just be done, instead of constantly stepping on the rake, right? Involving a bunch of stuff that's unnecessary, and that,
Yeah, I also think that unless the developer themselves come out and say, we're disappointed in the sales of particular game A, B, or C, that when we just hear news out, when we hear these publications come out and talk about the sales of something, that's not Square coming out saying that they feel like they made a mistake. It's just that, outlets are giving people the information about how it's sold in particular regions, and you extrapolate that across how the previous one did, and it doesn't sell as well. Now there's a lot of nuance in there, like we talked about earlier, the time of the place that the world was in at that time, how many consoles were available at that time versus where they are now. So there's a lot of ways that you can look at that number, but unless the company comes out, like if Square was to come out like how they said with Tomb Raider, we're disappointed in the sales of Tomb Raider, and 8 million copies isn't enough, and we're like, what are you talking about? It's a lot of places that would kill for 8 million in sales of something. Now, if they come out and say it, then you could be like, well, guess what? If you released it on Xbox, it would have been a better chance that you would have got some better sales, and that's a legit, quiver. But when you're just listening to news outlets talk about the sales of something, that's not them complaining that they're disappointed in the sales. And that doesn't mean you go out and say, well, if they're disappointed in sales, you can, well, you should have put it on Xbox, or you should have put it here, or you should have put it there. Like, I kind of feel like people don't, think about things like that before they say it, because it's not like they're the ones complaining about it. If they are complaining about it, then guess what? Go at it. Have fun. Tell them how you really feel about, you took the money from Sony, and yes, you probably wouldn't have sold that much more on Xbox, but guess what? You would have still sold some copies on Xbox, and the number would have probably looked a little bit better. But the fact that that's not coming from them, that's a whole different conversation that you kind of need to think about before you start talking about where games should go and where games should have been at.
So Forte, your rationale is sound, but I was also gonna compare that to the reality of it's Square Enix, and they're going to say that the sales were disappointing.
Oh well, because
they always do.
But they haven't. But that's what I'm saying. But that's the thing. Like
they haven't yet. Yeah, I'll agree.
That's the thing. That's the thing I'm talking about. So I wouldn't have a problem, and this is the thing. I don't even think BRAP would have a problem, as much as he's saying right now how people are not giving all the information and all the nuance to the conversation. If Square was to come out and say that we're disappointed in the sales of Final Fantasy, and people start, hammering him, be like, well, you're the one that took the deal from PlayStation to put it only on PlayStation. And people wanted to use the nuance of the fact that it's not available on Xbox, or it's not available on PC day and date. You made that decision, so you kind of got to live with it. Then I think BRAP would be like, okay, well, people got a point there, because they're talking from a point of emphasis of strength. But right now, people are just talking out the ass, and they don't know what's going on because Square hasn't said anything yet. I don't know. I just like to wait for information before I say stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
The world's a better place when you do that, isn't it, Logic?
Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead, say it.
No, I mean, I'll answer it, because I've tried to be careful and judicious, right, about how heavy-handed my perspective is, and I will readily admit, with no problems, I own it. On any given Sunday, like my predisposed disposition is to say, right, I have a degree in finance, I have a degree in software engineering. I'm not arguing with someone who's not steeped in those domains, right? Based on their assumption and speculation about a space they know nothing about and especially have never worked in, right? Have never worked in the field, have never done software integration, have never done software tests, and I'm talking about of big complex systems for multi-billion-dollar systems that can do very interesting things to people with more precision than is necessary in a video game, right? So, like, there's just some days like I don't want to be bothered with having that discussion and that argument. That being said, I have argued very strenuously about the null hypothesis, and what that means is, like, I cannot stand people who come into an argument and don't have a hypothesis and don't have a case, but what they simply want to contend is that, well, you have imperfect knowledge. So in light of you having imperfect knowledge and you not being omniscient, therefore you cannot make a claim for any educated hypothesis. I don't care how much math you do. I don't care how well structured your argument is. I don't care how much you show your math. You are not a Microsoft employee. You are not a PlayStation employee, and so you can't make a statement, and therefore any statement you make is incorrect. I don't feel like that's reasonable either. And I think the only people who make that contention are the type of people who are trying to deflect and who are trying to obfuscate and haven't actually done the math and walk through the logic themselves. If you take data and you put together an argument, it's fine if you don't agree with me, but I'm not going to have a discussion with you because you're not really trying to have a discussion with me. I'm not going to have a discussion with you when you have no hypothesis, you have no idea of your own. You're just trying to poke holes in a hypothesis that I've generated. That's not a debate and that's not a discussion. Right? So I do want to be careful about saying I'm not saying that you have to wait for an official earnings statement from Square Enix. I would totally accept based on looking at daily concurrent users, right, on whatever platform we have access to information on, I see that there are roughly 2 million players, and that probably means that they've sold less than 3.5 million copies on their opening weekend. That's a rational and logical step through. The problem I have is you then jumping aside to the causality and it's because it's not on Xbox. That's why. I'm like, you were fine with step one, but the vector you went down on step two makes no sense. So I'm all happy for people to be a part of the discussion without necessarily being steeped in the background or the expertise. That's fine, but one, for frack's sake, I mean, show some humility, right? In that you may not be correct and that you might be wrong. Half the problem that we have with the things that people say is it's not just that they say them, but they are absolutely insistent that they are correct, that no one other than them gets it. And that despite all of the data and all of the case that you've made, they assert that what you just put together makes no sense.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing this with nerds and other legends. And it's like, he's like, we're not arguing that multi-platform games don't move the needle. We're talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and how it's being reported or presented by influencers and content creators, that it should have been on Xbox. And what we're discussing is that it isn't. Yeah, it should have been on Xbox, and it would have solved all its problems. What we're doing is adding additional nuance and context to that, what should be in that conversation, and the fact that you're comparing Rebirth to Remake, when Remake released on a platform that had over 120 million hardware units sold, and was released at the start of the pandemic. And Rebirth is
the addressable market.
What's
right.
That?
So, and I go back to the simple math that I said, right? The fact of the matter is that the initial game released to an addressable market of 120 million people, right? And even if you add Xbox, even if it was multi-platform, right, your addressable market is 77 million people. That is mathematically, quantitatively less than 120 million. And so the sales were not going to be the same unless some of those 87 million people bought more than one unit, maybe. But if you just assume that the ratio is going to be the same, even if you dispense with the pandemic, just assume that the ratio is going to be the same, then you're unlikely to sell an equivalent number of units.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even imagine too, Logic, that they're probably looking at how Final Fantasy 15 sold on the Xbox One.
No, absolutely. I'm not
disagreeing with you.
Incredibly beneficial and deferential to their argument. I'm saying even if I take this is what I always do, right? Take their own argument and articulate a better case than they did in the first place, right? Even if I take your argument and say putting it on Xbox would have solved the problem, your addressable market is still only 77 million people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
And you're putting it on a platform where, as we've said on this podcast numerous times before, your biggest competitor is everyone's attention that's consumed by Game Pass. And your $70 game competes with the $500 games in aggregate that are in Game Pass. And somebody goes, why would I go bother paying for that when I'm already paying $17 a month and have access to all this other stuff? I'll just wait for that to go on sale. But even if I dispense with that argument, your addressable market is still only 77 million people.
Yeah. I was taking a step further with how
very large values.
What's that? Lodge, you there? I don't know if you were.
Oh yeah. You didn't hear what I said?
No, what'd you say?
I said, I'm sorry, this is just a podcast where 2 + 2 does not equal 5 for very large values of 2.
No, but I would even make that argument if you look at.
We could break that down into a fraction.
You got to imagine they're probably looking at how Final Fantasy 15 did. It was a multi-platform release on PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, and total sales. The Xbox One accounted for about, and I'm being generous here, 10% of Final Fantasy 15 sales, and so that goes back to that question: does it make sense for them to invest additional dollars, time, resources, labor, manpower, all that stuff, to not just make it for one Xbox console, but make it for 2 consoles now? And those things, and so those are the kind of things that they're factoring into the decision. Plus, obviously, we know that Sony has money had in this deal, so there's that to contend with too. But again, I think the overall point is that, again, this conversation requires more context. Additional, it's not given the nuance it deserves by content creators, by influencers. You see it on Twitter. And it just, at least in my opinion, it just dumbs down the conversation, and it's not productive. So,
yeah. And I'd also be like, it would also help me to feel like your argument was warranted for me to pay attention to. If I had the additional context that maybe you'd played Nier Automata, Persona 3 Reload, Elden Ring, Tales of Arise, Star Ocean: The Second Story R, Monster Hunter Rise, Ys 9, Monstrum Nox, and Crisis Core. Like it would help me to if I felt like, well, when these other games were available for me to go play, right, that I played them. But I mean, part of the problem is that there's a lot of rabble rousing from people. Again, I go back to my earlier statement in the podcast. And PR showing
Logic, you're botting out. I don't know if you can hear us. Do we lose him, Forte?
They got him.
Oh man, Phil got him.
They got him.
I think he's botting out.
They got him.
Forte.
Yeah, it looks like the stream botted for a second. Did you guys lose me, or did I lose you?
We lost you. Yeah, but you're back. You're back. Go ahead, Logic.
It's over. They got him.
Oh man, I think we lost him. Let me check the stream here.
He's gone.
He might be gone.
He's gone.
Well, I think the biggest thing too, Forte, is that look, at the end of the day, Sony paid for the exclusive, right? For the
they did
timed exclusivity. That's it too.
I just look at it like, hey, I'm not gonna be mad at the company for taking a bag. No. If anything, you know.
Yeah. So yeah. I'm sorry, Forte. So nerds, other legends. You're saying if it didn't do well porting to other platforms, PC, Xbox makes sense. It doesn't just make sense. This is where we're saying this conversation is more nuanced, because if you look at the data of Final Fantasy 15 on the Xbox, where Square Enix invested money to make that game, to port that game on the Xbox One, now they're having to do additional work and porting it to 2 Xbox SKUs. And the previous multi-plat release they had on that platform that had a larger install base, by the way, I might add, Nerds of the Other Legends, the Xbox One did. And it sold, and the Xbox One sales accounted for less than 10% of all Final Fantasy 15 sales. Does it make sense for them? Maybe not. It's not an automatic. Like this idea that, okay, it's on more screens, it makes more sense. It's going to sell more. That's not always the case. We know that. It's not always the case. We lost Logic Forte.
Yeah, I'm still here, but something's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you want to try to explain repeat what you were saying before you cut out.
Is Jova?
I don't know, man. Are you guys able to hear me okay right now?
Oh yeah, we can hear you fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say because I don't know if I've got something going on bandwidth wise, but I'll say in response to what he was saying, it's like you said, it's not just that it makes sense. The calculation that has to be done is you have to take the money that Sony gave them off the table, then you have to add the money in investment that it takes for them to put the game on other platforms, because again, that's additional level of effort, and then rethink what the potential sales numbers are, and then calculate what the expected profitability would be. And it's not just necessarily an upside.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point, Logic. I want to get this last super chat from JD Gamer with the $10 super chat. Thank you for the super chat, JD Gamer. Just a question for the panel. Many times people have suggested that Microsoft is trying to create a monopoly. What if instead of spending $80 billion on publishers, they money hatted every major third-party game for 10 years?
Hey. That might cost them more than $80 billion.
Yeah. Logic, any thoughts?
You know Logic isn't gonna.
Yeah, I've run the question through my head like several times. I'm not really sure what we're trying to get at. I mean, what I'll say is the same thing that I said during the acquisition. Right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you like it or not, exclusives have been an accepted norm of the business for 40 years. And until that's legislated or regulated out of the industry, it's not illegal and it's an accepted practice. Sony does it, Nintendo does it, Xbox does it, but for some reason there's this effort by Xbox and others to vilify it. So I don't necessarily think that would matter if you want to lock people up in long-term deals. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I mean, Sony is trying to make long-term deals that are for more than just one exclusive from the same developer or the same studio. The problem with the acquisition was that, again, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you agree with it or not, as I said a year ago, 10 publishers, platform owners, whatever you want to call it, 10 of them made 65% of the revenue in the industry, which to me is a lopsided metric that I personally think any rational human being who understands economics and competition and anti-competition and antitrust, that's a lopsided metric to me that requires at least some scrutiny. And last year we allowed that to go down to 9. And there's no effective argument to me in terms of long-term impact that makes that good for consumers, that we reduce the total number of suppliers to customers in the market.
Logic, we just had this conversation offline about food prices.
Yeah.
No, I mean, seriously, like one of the issues, one of the things that's driving up food prices is the consolidation in the grocery industry and the supply chain. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that when inflation went up, that grocery suppliers raised prices, and when inflation went down, they'd be damned if they were going to go down with it. so prices stay up.
Because
and
that industry is
supported by consolidation because there's less competition on the market, right?
Exactly.
So
that's what we've been arguing. That's what we've been saying this whole time to people. Pay attention. There's other examples where consolidation hasn't benefited consumers, and the one that's hitting home right now, hitting a lot of people's wallets, is grocery stores.
Yeah, because you can't get around that.
Yeah,
and by the way, as the cost of food goes up, so yea, verily will everything go along with it. Because that's what everyone buys, right? When food and gas prices go up and are sustained, that causes a real problem with trying to get inflation back down. But anyway, the answer to JD Gamer's question, I guess, is I don't really care. You know, if they hadn't spent the $70 billion, this is the thing that super confused me. Like, no mess. Like, again, seems like a tropish, very simple argument or question, but it's a multi-trillion-dollar company, tons of money, tons of resources, tons of adjacencies and markets. Why Xbox didn't leverage that, right, to lock down exclusives, I don't understand why. And they did it during the 360 era, so I don't get it. I totally understand the business case for, hey, because I would be making the same argument too if I were inside the veil. Hey, rather than me spend $10 billion to lock down exclusives, right? I'm just going to buy the whole cow. You know, I get it, right? If that's the way you're going to go about competing. As a consumer, I said I see problems with that. But if I were part of the corporate machine, makes sense.
Yeah, the biggest thing is I didn't have a problem with the decision to do it, to, you know, start purchasing, you know, publishers and everything like that. But I think it's disappointing that it took so long to get to that point where if Xbox or if Microsoft would have backed the gaming cow 5, 6, 7 years before that, they could have probably had the same effect, but a lot up. Well, fortunately, I'm sorry to separate. They did it to themselves. I've talked numerous times about how their revenue was up on game sales in the years prior to 2014. Yeah.
And they closed and got rid of so many studios that they cratered their software game sale revenue down to like $4 billion. They've had to spend that $75 billion to $115 billion to pull themselves out of a freaking bathtub. That was a problem that they created themselves. And my problem isn't so much that they did it. My problem now, today, when I talk about their performance, my problem is I don't see the return on investment coming back. I don't see them having spent that $115 billion and them coming back to a point where they own like 10 more studios numerically than PlayStation does, them hitting on cylinders that show an overwhelming competitive force. My personal feeling, and I strongly wonder if this is what Amy Hood is saying, is look, for the money that we've spent and the number of studios that we have and all the adjacencies that we have, right? This is my point where I go through the roof and I get super frustrated at people saying, oh, but COVID. Like, the freaking company literally makes Microsoft Teams.
Trust me, they made money off of people having to be under COVID. They made more money.
Right. And they're the second largest CSP in the world. Like, my thing is, for all the tools that they have and all the things that have been rendered unto Phil Spencer, he literally has his hands on DirectX. He gets support from the cloud division for no cost or reduced cost. Like, they should be gathering up into being an overwhelming force. They should kind of be where they are.
In my opinion, they should be the market leader with all the tools and resources they have at their fingertips. And for whatever reason, they just can't get it to fire on all cylinders. You know, and the fact that, like, and I want to read this other super chat from JD Gamer here in a minute, but I remember there's reporting from Imran Khan who was like, it started this generation. Sony's outbidding Microsoft for third-party exclusivity deals. What? I'm like, what? How? How's that happening? JD Gamer says, the $5 super chat says, continued, what effect do you think it would have had on the industry, including PlayStation, Switch, PC, FIFA, Madden, COD, GTA, all of them exclusive to Xbox? I guess, I mean, Xbox.
I mean, I don't even think that's a realistic question. Like the amount of money.
Well, I think Logic Xbox probably would have had a very competitive lead, and maybe we don't have PlayStation and Nintendo, or maybe we do. Who knows? But go ahead.
But the problem is I mean, let's particularly pick at the EA problem. And I even said, like, in a case study that I built a couple of weeks ago, I said this is one of the problems Microsoft needs to strike at in order to be globally successful, right? They've got to get, and you and I have talked about this a lot, they've got to get content that is appealing to Asia, to Europe, to Latin America, and to Africa, and those countries don't necessarily want to play. Wait, hold on, you guys still got me?
Yeah, we still got you.
Yeah, we got you.
And those guys necessarily don't want to play Halo, Gears of War, and Forza, like the Brits do. When I talk about Europe, I'm talking a little bit of the skew, right, in terms of like Europeans heavily lean soccer, Formula One. Those aren't necessarily the brands and titles and franchises that went out big in the U.S., right? There's some crossover there, but not necessarily the same numbers, right? There still needs to be a tuning of the type of content that you're going to deliver in the geographic areas. And one of the things that I said is that they need to get their hands on a Eastern studio and an Eastern think tank, Eastern thought leadership that help them, because I don't think they figured this out on their own, that help them figure out what they need to weaponize and target and vector to get a foothold in Asia, right? But I said that the other thing that they need to do is they also need to go after content that has global appeal. And what has global appeal? Soccer. Right? So look, yes, I have my arguments against consolidation, but if I'm just doing game theory and talking about what Xbox needs to do, like if you were going to go after something big, and they claim that they're not done with acquisition, and you thought you were going to, they've pissed off the regulatory framework and regime now that I don't think they can go after another big whale like they did with Activision. But if in any way in the world that you could, what I would go after is I would go after EA, and I would go after soccer.
I believe when they had the FIFA deal, they were seeing some benefit in Europe from having the FIFA.
Yeah, and I mean, and that if you could put together a studio that could do it, like that might be a thing to do, right? Like FIFA is shopping around. FIFA's learned their lesson. They learned that they were dumbasses, and they thought that the brand name and the league name was going to carry them and allow them to do something successful. And what EA proved is, hey, watch my beer, right? EA Football Club is as successful and actually more successful now than it was with the FIFA name to it. So if you were going to go after why Xbox hasn't already locked down the FIFA name, I don't know.
I don't know, man. It's a great question. All right, I'm going to grab this super chat from Warwana. $2 super chat says Xbox or Sony fanboys still hit the like button. Thank you, Rwanda, for that super chat. All right, gentlemen, do need to wrap up the show. That's all the time we have tonight, but I want to thank my great panel members here, Gaming Forte and Game Logic, and everyone in the live chat. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening. Really appreciate the support as always. Please hit that like button, and please let us know what you thought of the show in the comment section below. And if you're new, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. Forte, you have a show tomorrow night. Please let everyone know what time and where they can listen to DPS.
Damage Per Second Podcast, DPS, with the homie Slobo Backslap. It will be tomorrow at 9 p.m. on Slobo's channel. Also on the DPS channel. Going to be a great time. Going to have a lot of conversations about stuff. And we will see you guys then. Have a great day and enjoy the games you play.
Yeah, no, thank you, Forte. And Game Logic, absolutely. if you want to be found, let everyone know they can find you as well.
He doesn't want to be found.
I think did we lose him?
He probably did again.
All right. We may have lost Logic again, or he doesn't want to be found. But outside of that, thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Again, appreciate the support. Please smash that like button. If you're new, subscribe. Hit the bell notifications so you're alerted when we go live. And may do a BRAP rant maybe this Friday. So give me a follow on BRAP_podcast on Twitter, or X as it's now known. And we'll catch you next time until then, have fun playing video games. Because that's what it's all about, like Forte said. So, bye.
Video games.